Welcome to the Finance Podcast. The topic of this episode, the role of an actuary in the AI world, a journey through data, technology, governance and talent, with Daniel Trzesniak from the Swiss Association of Actuaries.
So I think I will do the presentation in English. I think it fits okay for everybody that we switch to English. Okay, good. So let me start. It's 10 o'clock Swiss time, and let me give a quick introduction. So my name is Daniel Trzesniak. I am now working as a partner at EY, so heading AI and data for basically financial service institutions. And I was asked by the Swiss Actuarial Association to give the presentation of the role of an actuary in the AI world. And basically, I started my career as a pricing actuary. So I'm not a Swiss qualified actuary, but I'm a member of the Swiss Actuarial Association. And when I started at Swiss Re, and I studied physical chemistry, and I wanted to do drug design and work with molecules in pharma industry, they changed the way actually they do research for this drug design. So basically I knew all the mathematics, but I didn't know where to apply it to. And then a few colleagues of mine said, well, why don't you become an actuary? Because the methods behind the mathematics is very similar to what the one you do in chemistry, but instead of free energy, you start to calculate expected loss. And that's when I started as a pricing actuary, so I joined Swiss Re. And when I got Swiss Re, it was quite interesting because a pricing actuary there is actually a person developing tools and systems for the underwriters. That's basically was my first job. So it was quite nice. I got exposed to all the actuarial methods that exist there. So IBNR calculations, distributions, convolutions, seeding to layers, and all this kind of stuff. And Swiss Re was very accurate in doing everything, very precise. So the models were very rich, and I was very happy there. But then I had the impression I needed to understand a little bit better about reinsurance, and then I became an underwriter. And when I became an underwriter, I started using these methods. It's basically what most of the actuaries do. And then I got a bit frustrated, because at the moment that you get to this stage, then you see and you start noticing the main problems that you have with the actuarial function. So most of the times I was basically copying data from A to B. That was my job, 80% of the time. So the cool actuarial work that I wanted to do, I couldn't do. And then you start thinking, right, is it still like this? How should we transform? Is it really something that motivates people? And basically that was the inspiration for this presentation. And I hope, again, I will tell more or less a story of everything that I've seen, because after I left Swiss Re, I started developing tools for actuaries to try to make their life easier, since I felt the pain myself. And again, we can stop anytime. It's a collection of slides, and let's make it interactive. So if you have any questions, anything, please just interrupt me. Okay? So let's start. I will start with actuarial transformation. Then I think one of the most disruptive things that we should really, and it's not going to only change the way actuaries work, but the way everybody works, is Gen AI. And I will give my views. Of course, it's something that I'm doing currently, right? It's something that I've been also developing and integrating the tools that I develop for actuaries. So I will first define what Gen AI is exactly, then how insurance are actually using and incorporating Gen AI in their methods and their processes. And then if we have time, we go to the market outlook. So it's a recent survey AY did on that, and then a wrap up. So actuarial transformation. Let's look at what happened for actuaries in the past decades. So here I decided to put a timeline here just to see. And I started as an actuary. It was about this time here. So I worked during this period here. And the world changes, and with the changes also the actuarial function changes. And a lot of it is, of course, motivated by a regulation. So regulation, we see Solvency II, IFRS 17, that was also a big monster that happened there. But many other things affected the way actuaries actually do their work. And starting from a very traditional role in the early 2000s, right? And all the tech constraints and lots of things were still on paper and so on. So the first thing was really this technology boost that started. So more and more data being available, available, data being there. Computer developments, actuaries were started to specialize in functions, so that's basically this data revolution that happened here. And then the global financial crisis started happening, so regulators got stricter, and again, actuaries had to adapt and continue to evolve. And with time, you see, then you start moving here more into technology integration that's still happening, and lately sustainability, now diversity is a big topic, and eventually Gen AI. Now, what I notice is that actuaries have the tendency also to work in silos. It's a pretty much, it depends a little bit of the personality, but normally what I've seen is that every actuary tends to do their own thing, right? So go to spreadsheets to try to develop their models and then try to advertise that, but it's really a function that, from my experience, is really, could profit from more collaboration here in the industry. Now, what I'm proposing here, and this comes from our studies so at EY, so that's not my own slide, it's a slide that I discussed with my colleagues at EY, but I like to present it anyway. So I think the function needs to transform, because what we observe, what the actuaries are doing today, should not be what the actuaries should be doing in the future, right? So actuaries are key for insurance companies. They really have a very special skill set to analyze data, to manage risks, to understand how the company works, how to bring value to the company, right? But because of several reasons that I mentioned earlier, actually sometimes have to work on tasks that are not really bringing value, in my opinion, or is a bit of a waste of resource if you think that actuaries will be just copying data from between two systems instead of doing what they do best. So what happened in the past, and if you look, that's this pyramid here, that actually today, most of the actuaries spend their time doing process-driven and repetitive tasks instead of really doing tasks that support the company strategy. That's where they would be making a difference, right? And our idea is that to invert this pyramid, that this one here is really delegated to automation, AI, you name it, but where the IP is and where you really can make a difference is on the top and support the company strategy, right? Now, how do we get there? This transformation has to be top-down. So it has to be something that is supported from the top management. It's something that has to be promoted. And we see that basically there are three, I mean, it depends how you count, but there are a few key things that you have really to take into consideration for this transformation, which is the process and governance. So that's the journey I mentioned in my title, people and culture, and data and technology. And today I will focus more on the data and technology bit, but all the other things are also important. Good. This is a busy slide, but I kept it busy, so normally we don't present it like this, but I kept it in the same way because that's how I think it would create more impact. Because you see that transformation will address the weakness in the function that I mentioned earlier. That's, to me, again, something that companies can use better. And what are basically the challenges surrounding? And to me, the main challenge, the one I really felt the most pain, is about the obsolete architecture, right? So basically, there's no single true of data. You have spreadsheets normally around. You never know what is the right state of the data that you have to do your analysis. And many times, I remember my time at Swiss Re, I went to the data source, and then I said, that's the data. And then I said, that cannot be. It doesn't seem right. And then you go back to the original source, and you import everything again, you massage the data again, you put it in the system again, and then data quality starts very quickly to deteriorate, and it comes like a snowball. So, it's really where I felt most pain. Same thing here. So if there are very qualified people that come out of university with a very special skill, and in the end of the day, they're doing tasks that basically most of the time copying data around. So that cannot be. That cannot be. And third thing is what I also mentioned, the siloed function, right? So normally, I think more communication, more integration in the company and not really working in a silo would also benefit the function. And maybe, these things are related, right, because of the type of work. So if you're trying to adjust data that it fits your model, you want to do that alone, right? And that's what we should change. So the actuaries should be there really talking to people and present in the market and understanding the developments that happen in the world. In terms of external pressure, what I also mentioned earlier, regulatory changes. So this is really a big challenge. You always have to keep up with all these regulations that's happening in the market. And you need to be flexible and adapt quickly to react to these changes. Market pressure is something that has been identified. You see that insurance companies want to do everything bigger, better, faster. It's more granular. You have very personalized products now. And most of the actuarial models rely on law of large numbers, so lots of data. But if you start to become more personalized, or you start to collecting different type of data, like with the smartwatches, and maybe you have other personal information on your risks, so you have really to adapt. And of course, the war for talent, as I said, is a very special skill. So when you go to interviews and you look at the qualifications that an actuary should have, they're very specific. So there's the market is very fierce, and it makes for you to differentiate the market very difficult. So you really have to be able to adapt and go through the transformation. From the technology side, that comes against, what we have to acknowledge is that technology has developed significantly over the past decade. So I'm not only talking about Gen AI, but in general. So if you look at the tools that I was using at Swiss Re in the beginning, were basically spreadsheet-based, and the market has changed now to this platform-based, so where everything is integrated and professional deployed. If you look at the 10 years ago, maybe they were monoliths, so difficult to understand, but more and more it become more granular, and with modules that you can actually really have very specialized, that if you orchestrate it right, you provide really a lot of support to actuaries. Then, as I said, data and AI, that's something that's coming. It's not only for the actuarial work, but especially if you look in other functions, process optimizations, even data ingestion, all these topics now are being more and more tackled by technology, and of course this will reduce cost and also free up time from actuaries, so that's the vision. Another thing that we added here is basically the talent pool coming new of from universities. They have a different type of skills, so the education is also changing, so you see more and more these young generations, they come also with this personality of always challenging what's in there, which I think is good. And it's an additional factor that here we should consider, because if you want to keep this new generation also motivated, you have to provide as a company also the means for these people to actually feel motivated and do their work. So that's basically from the technology side. So if you bring all together and if you go to this transformation, I don't have to list, but the idea is that benefits are clear, so you really increase operation efficiency and especially attract and retain talent. This to me are the main message of this slide. So if I would picture the future of actuary, actuarial is what I said. So I want to have, that's what I see, an integrated team that really works on the strategy, works on really key topics, that also has diligence to meet efficient and regulatory compliance requirements, react quickly, and are very flexible, and collaborate. So collaboration, I cannot stress out, this to me is very, very important, that they're always in contact with what's happening around. So that's one of this, basically summarized here. So the strategic piece, more the risk, financial reporting, capital piece, and more the product piece. And I said here, basically the three things that I would stress is, let's keep the actuaries motivated so they can really focus on the tasks that make sense, have a high-skilled and agile team, and especially enable to data and AI and technology. So that data is available. It's like, when you plug in your cell phone on the socket, you don't think, where is this energy coming from? You just do it and you use it. You just consume it. And also technology, that tasks that don't add value can be delegated to other functions, but especially to technology. No problem. Is the other one fine? Or? Good. So Gen AI, and again, you might all know what Gen AI is, but I will do a very quick overview, because sometimes you hear a lot of people talking about AI, but AI is not something new. So AI is something that is there for many, many years, and actually have been using one way or another way AI in their work anyway. So AI is basically a field of computer science that says that machines are capable of taking human intelligence, and this is something that has been happening for many, many years. We have a timeline there on the right-hand side, and as it evolved, and that's why I'm trying to localize where Gen AI sits on this. So of course there are other areas, but then it started coming to machine learning, which is basically that machines, by showing machines a certain pattern, machines can then replicate that in an intelligent way, right? So machine learns, and there are many actuarial methods that based on machine learning. Then deep learning is another thing. Basically here you're mimicking neural networks and use neurons, like try to simulate how the human brain works to actually to do machine learning. So it's a subset of machine learning, and eventually Gen AI that started in 2017 but became very popular, I think, in 2021 when ChatGPT was then deployed, and then people just got known or start to use the technology more and more. And in Gen AI, so what the difference here is, it's based on large language models, which are models that are capable of generating new information, new text, based on user prompts, based on user instructions. Yeah. Now, what is a game changing here? And to me, that's the main one. And again, it doesn't affect only the actuarial role, but affect everyone, is the capability of these models to have a very good level to understand human language. Right? So if you can interact with these models as more or less as you're interacting with a person. And interesting is that today it's very capable of understanding dialects, even Schweizerdeutsch. So if you can talk to a model in Schweizerdeutsch, and it can even do the Walliser dialect there, and it understands. And it also understands company jargon, and you'll see an example, so I hope to get to the demo soon, because I want to show you it's just not slides, but something that we can actually, that you can actually use today. And it can use all these abbreviations that you use in actuarial. So IBNR, you would understand. VA, that's volume average, and all this kind of things. So you can teach these models, and they do a very good job. They come with reason, so if you have a good architecture in the back and you combine this technology, so not using it standalone, it can be really powerful to do a lot of stuff. So if you give enough context and your model is aware of what you want, and the model itself is trained in the domain you want, you can really come far, and you can get to point to reason with the model. You can get to a discussion that's very similar to a discussion that you have with a person. And what's become really trendy is this multi-model. Again, maybe it doesn't apply here too much, but I have here the link to an article that explains why this is interesting. But multi-model is originally these language models were capable only of generating text in, text out. But today, probably you've seen that and you probably use it in your private lives. You can give almost any input, and it can generate almost any output. So a case that we saw a lot is satellite imaging when you're talking about netcat hazards. So basically on this scanning of the sky and the pictures, you can much better now identify and see patterns on that. So that's why these models are quite good, not only on Gen AI, but in general, and give you really good insights of the risk that you have there. So on the data, so why Gen AI will change this data issue that I mentioned before? Because there's a lot happening on the data ingestion side that should allow then actuaries to have better access to data. And what we are proposing here is that instead of really checking if the data is correct, like I mentioned I was doing, I can just consume the data knowing that's correct. So what do I need to basically run my business, right? Again, do I really have to run after my sources and understand if the data is available, or is the other way around? I think what data I need, and the data is available. So that's where we want to get to. The data is there, so if you organize your data properly, if you have defined owners for your data, if you have contracts between all the data providers and data consumers that fulfill a certain level of quality, then you can achieve that. And what it means for actuaries in the end is that once you have a case identified, you don't think of the mathematics first. You really think on the data. So what do I need? You answer these questions. and the data will be there. And then you think of your model. Because otherwise you get to the point, as I said earlier, that you have a very sophisticated model which works in theory, but you cannot apply it because the data is just not there. We don't need to go to all here, but you can imagine that is not all perfect. This Gen AI and large language models, they can do a lot because they can generate a wide range of outputs, and actually they look today very sensible. Very quick, you can produce content. So as I said, you will see later on the demos, I can generate a synthetic data set if I give the right instruction in a matter of seconds. Right? So that's good for model testing, that's good for many reasons, for calibration. And I even get these things well documented, just with the help with a large language model. Right? So domain flexibility, what I mean here is that you can train the models to specific domains. It doesn't necessarily have to be large language models, but what is becoming more popular is small language models, because they have a tendency to be more accurate. But you can really provide information and train the model itself with this information, which is pretty nice, and it works pretty well. You can also, instead of training the model, another thing that you can do is give more context. So as computers become more powerful, we have something called a context window, which is what the model knows. And if you give, as a company, if you have proper prompts, which is basically what you feed the model to the model understand where you stand, where you are, and give more context, the model can also, you can overcome a lot of problems. So I had a test and a demo the other day where I gave a set of policies to the system, and I asked the model, is this claim a valid claim or not? So I gave an email, just playing around with that. And then the model was not really giving me the right answer. It was not looking at the exclusions. So I just, with a simple sentence, please consider the exclusions in the policies, then I already got much better results. And of course, cost optimization. That goes without saying that if you integrate this in the processes, then you really can improve the costs and efficiency. But again, as I said, it's not all perfect. The main issue that I see is trust issues. And again, this comes with experience. You really have to, it's not because now you have LLMs that you can forget about traditional software development with unit tests and all these good things that are there for a reason. And to avoid that, you really have to make sure that the model does not hallucinate, which is just giving answers. So you can trust it. It comes when you read it. Oh, there is some credibility here, but it could be completely wrong. So we have really to have control on that. And there are frameworks. So the governance is really important, that you increase accuracy and minimize hallucinations. That's what you want. It's also not performing calculations. So it's a language model. If you want the model to perform calculations, you have to use other designs. So there are other ways of doing that, with what is now being very much in the news, is agentic AI framework, right? But the model itself doesn't do calculations, and we've seen that early models of ChatGPT, as some simple mathematics, it was just not getting right. Skill erosion, so we have to be careful. This will not replace people. So people tend to become lazy because now they don't need to know that anymore, because the computer will do, to a certain extent, is right, but to me it's more an enhancement than really replacement. So really you have to be careful and keep up to date with what's happening and understand exactly how to use this model best. Context limitation, I already addressed. So as I said, this context window to give more information to the model is still limited, but it's getting bigger and bigger. So this thing here, I think, will overcome very quickly. And issue here for actuaries, especially if you want to use Gen AI in areas where regulation is important, you have to be able to explain. So you cannot just say, I took this decision because the model said, and you don't know what's happening. And that's a bit tricky, especially if you use deep learning, because when you go to this neural network setup, you really don't understand exactly what's happening behind. So that's still a bit of an issue. But again, I believe that as models evolve, this will be overcome. But still an issue. So now I go to insurance, and I know the next slide is very busy, because insurance are using this everywhere. And basically that's a collection that we did at EY to see on an insurance company all the areas where you hear anything about Gen AI, and you can imagine that's happening everywhere. We are now looking at basically this part here, so reserving, pricing, with automation, insights, knowledge management, risk reduction, regulatory compliance. So especially going through regulation, trying to find gaps on the regulation. You ingest all these documents. You can imagine this, trying to find overlap and gaps and see if you are compliant is a very good case for Gen AI to help you. But of course, there are other areas, right? So financial reporting seems to be developing now, and many companies want now, if you think of an IFRS report or a solvency report, SST, that these reports are automatically written based on the data. So many vendors are trying to do that, and the results are still not there. But again, I said if you give enough context, if you have an expert to guide, you actually can get very far. More specific now on areas where we've seen things working. And intelligent underwriting, to me, is the best case here, because here I have many projects in this area, and the triaging seems to be something that happens a lot. Basically, if you get emails with submission and request, the system automatically decides and identifies red flags and said, no, this is aligned with the risk appetite or not. We can refuse because there's this exclusion. So basically, on text, interpreting the text and processing, it's something that happens. On pricing, real-time pricing optimization. So basically what it means is that as data comes in, you have the pricing models, and it's not that Gen AI is used on the model itself, but is used to adjust the parameters based on the external conditions that you provide to have the price always up to date. And then you can, at any point in time, look at your results. So that's really happening, and we see it working. Operational, basically here you have the classic fraud detection. So there are many cases on fraud detection. I mean, it's also a classic case for Gen AI, and many other cases, but I will not go into lots of detail. On reserving, and we're going to look at an agentic workflow for automation. It's basically individual reserving, so it's actually enhancing the actuarial capabilities to do these methods. So here are the enablers on the bottom. Now, if I look at the cases, and it's basically the same idea of basically how often we see them and how mature they are. So many of those are experimental. You see basically this picture, where when it comes to coding, custom GPT, they're very well established and they're happening everywhere. But many others, for example, the automatic report generation based on data, that's not yet mature enough. So many vendors are trying to do that, but it's not happening. And here basically you see a distribution of this according to what we see in the market. I think I will not go through this slide, but I will want to give you now a concrete example on reserving. So something that we do is we look at, and that's just an example of how the reserving process could look like. You have here basically the colors, so these are more related to data, this grayish one, here more related to reports, and here basically the process in between. What we do normally is we look at this and we see where are the areas where we can use either Gen AI, machine learning, or like analytics, just simple automation, and where we can inject data visualization on the top layer, right? So the first thing is not to actually come with automation and Gen AI on top, but to make sure that the process that you have is a robust process for the future. So that's the very first thing. Afterwards, you can start to look for potential optimization points, and that's what we do. New methods, new techniques, or really seeing who should be responsible for certain things. So if you look here, basically all this area here, when it comes to the report generation, actually shouldn't be doing that, because there are other better solutions that do that automated. So actually should be looking really on this area here where their skills make a difference. So how this all comes together, and I wanted to show this on the reserving one. I have 2 demos. And this is something that we did a few weeks back. And I claim that technology is available to everyone. So everybody, every person can actually get and do that in Python and Streamlit. It's really, really simple. What will make the difference in the end is the data and the people. So here I will start playing. What you do is basically how it could look like, right? So basically, I'm not looking at the data challenge. I'm assuming the data is there, but I can select a reserving class. And then you can really talk to the model. So you don't need to know how to code. You don't need to know Excel, but you can just say what you want, right? So here, run a sensitivity on the incurrent chain ladder model with a volume average 8 pattern. Provide me the impact by year. So the model, first time you run it's a bit slower, so it compiles everything. Then it goes to the back and delegates basically this request, and you get back the table. So you get back a table, of course you instruct how you want to have the table, but then you can refine it, right? So provide me a summary view. So we were just basically aggregating. But the model was able to understand all the language that I provided, right? So of course that's the difference. You cannot go to ChatGPT and expect that they will do the same. But if you really calibrate and give enough context, then you see that the model will understand. So it's just, I'm asking now, please can you add the 6, 10, and 12 pattern, so basically how many years I'm using on averaging, and this is happening. So the message is basically what an actuary needs to do and what has to learn and how he should transform. And to me, it has to just to do what they've been doing all the time. So be an actuary, understand the models, be able to instruct the model as you would do their work themselves, right? It's like you can think of this as another person that you're having an interaction with, and the models will do the heavy lifting on the back. So I'm not saying that you should not know how to program, how to code, and how to do this stuff. I think it helps. But the important is you don't need to, because with this technology, you have access to all the things in the back that you don't want to do. Yes?
Who is defining the language? Because what I want to know, I have to talk into the system. But there is a certain language I have to use.
You mean which language,
actually,
if English or not?
Blah, blah, blah.
Yes. So we train the model, and we give this context to the model that it understands this thing. So you can do that in several ways. You can embed it in the model, like train the model in a certain set and teach all these things. But you can also give documents, PDFs, reference online, to what we call the RAG system, and then the model will understand and learn that and have that in the context.
So everybody who is using the model has to speak this language.
So
the definition of the context you put in.
The context that you put in has, normally companies should have a defined language, a standard language, and should be able to understand this language. So if this language is fed to the model will know and we understand.
I think he wants to know the special expressions you're using.
Oh,
When you have a medical training, you need to train the medical expressions. And here you have to train.
You have to learn the language.
You have to train the
Yeah.
insurance expressions.
Exactly.
That's why an insurance person uses.
So we have to learn the new language and all the definitions.
So
Can I use this model?
Sorry.
No, it's correct. It's fine. Again, one way of doing is this: if you have a smaller model, you can train all the abbreviations, all the jargon. The model will know. Or you can add documents or reference online, and this will then be parsed into the model. And this is the advantage that's dynamic. So if you normally something that changes over time, often, then you should use the second approach. But it's something that's well established, like IBNR methods and this VA and all these abbreviations. You can really embed it into the model directly. Normally, there's not only one large language model, but there are many small models talking to each other. So there is one that understands the human language that you can interact with, and there are others that are really experts in certain areas and domains. So the other one that I have here is basically a similar one, and this was a bit more advanced, and it's a case of specialty insurance that we did, basically where we import a claims bordereau, so you can see similar to what we get in Excel. In this case, I think we're looking at casualty claims mainly in the US by broker, so we have all the information here. That's something that you would normally have as an actuary in a spreadsheet. And what we try to do here is just to make it a bit more approachable again, that you can talk to the model, you can say what you want. So here I'm just asking, can you plot the casualty clash in a certain style and show me the limits, or what's the excess and the limit of the policies. And then you can start interacting with that, and the system will be basically reacting. On the back is the same model that I had before, but I trained it a bit in a different way. I orchestrated it in a different way. I also made it more technical. And what I want to show here is that this is what an actuary needs to know, because that's what it thinks in their mind. It's just taking time away from this really typing and making this operational. The system can really help you a lot. The computer is there, but if we move forward, what I wanted to show is that at the end of the day, I have here something called the explanation, right? And what actuaries and most of developers don't like to do is to write documentation. I understand, but something that is there. Now this one, what we did is based on the instructions, and you always see what's happening here. Based on the instructions, once you're done, once you think, I've done my analysis, that's what I want to do, and it's doing the stuff, then the documentation is generated based on the prompts, right? And anytime you can have access to that, and it's something dynamic, right? So if I change something here, if I change an assumption, I don't need to maintain a documentation. It's automatically generated. It's always in sync. That's pretty nice. And basically, you can do the work just by talking to the machine. So I have 5 minutes. So let's look at quickly at the market outlook. What's happening, and that's a recent survey. So is this something that you see in your company? Is it something that's happening? So we did a European Financial Service AI survey, and there were about 120 companies in Europe, 20 in Switzerland, banks and insurance. And with all this AI, all these things that are happening, you can see that for most of them, it's really a priority. Okay, they're very optimistic that they will have an impact in productivity. It's, to me, a given, so it's something that I would not expect anything different than that. They want really to experiment with Gen AI in the next year, so it's something that they're more and more experimenting, and most of the use cases, I have to say, are really process optimization use cases, so they're not really value generation, but they're just optimization use cases, so making things faster, making things more efficient. I think on revenue generation use cases, still a bit, companies still a bit more careful. And of course, they're all investing heavily on Gen AI. Now, a bit on the dark side, it's really slow adaptation, and you can see here the numbers. In Europe, it's Switzerland a bit more, but they always have the feeling they are behind their peers in terms of Gen AI, and I understand that, and I guess if I would say a lot comes with the data. So I think there's a lot of experimentations. You might have seen many POCs happening, many people playing with it, but when it comes to bringing them into production in these cases, they suffer because they don't have the quality or the governance around it to come to that level. One example here on governance, inventories, so regulations require now, especially in Europe, that you track and create an inventory, centralize everywhere AI, this kind of methods are being used. And many of those companies, they are behind, and some of them didn't even know it was a requirement. More on the regulatory, most of them, and in Switzerland a lot, they say they're not ready to actually comply with all the incoming regulations for AI, right? Especially when it comes to training your model, this ethical and responsible AI requirements are not yet there. So it's something that has, if you really want to go into production, you have really to take care of this. And I would suggest that this is done soon. And the last one is the skill gap. And most of them have the impression their workforce has limited Gen AI expertise. I also don't know exactly what's behind this question, because what's the expertise here needed? Because to me, if I'm able to talk to the demo that I showed you earlier, that's really good. If you understand how to use it, you don't need to develop these things. I think there are people that can do that. But if you know what's behind, what are the limitations, and you can instruct the model properly, then I would say you're ready, you're getting in there. But anyway, that's the numbers we have, and they think they're not ready. And they're really thinking about upskilling plans. If I go deeper into that, and again, thinking of an actuary and the transformation I mentioned earlier, what percentage of the role do you expect to be affected by AI integration? And to me, I was expecting a very high number, above 90s, but it was actually a bit lower than that. So 25% of the roles are expected to be affected by AI. To me, I would have expected a much higher number here. And this one here, in Europe especially, there is a lot of concern, in Switzerland as well, but a bit less, feel that AI could make 10% of the roles redundant by next year. So now, if you are thinking about an actuary, a person that copies data from A to B, then I would agree with you. But if you really think about the IP that you have, the value that an actuary brings, then not. So you really have to adapt and make sure that you are evolving, you are using the technology to your advantage, and then I think this will not replace people, it will enhance people. So to wrap up, how to transform actuarial. So the recipe is really the first one, to reimagine, to really have a vision and have buy-in, understand where you're going, and really not to try to build suboptimal local solutions, but really have a vision for the future. Then redesign. It means once this vision is there, make sure that you have tangible results, that you can incrementally implement these things as a team, right? So if you want to realize, it has to be agile. It has to make sure that you develop at the same time you work on the current requirements, and especially, as I said, collaborating with your colleagues. So it has to be a combined effort and not just individuals trying to do something. Again, the three pillars, I go back to them: people and culture, process and governance, data and technology are really on the basis of this change. So that was the last slide I had. I thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know.
Question. Thank you. A question on the actuary, the demo you showed, where you talk to the machine and then the analysis comes out. A lot of the actuaries, they are experts in their tools, and they might feel even less effective or efficient if they have to talk in English to the machine instead of doing directly the manipulations. So why do you think this is an advantage?
I think that, of course, one thing doesn't exclude the other. I think it's an enhancement. And I mean, to be honest, many things I also do when I do this work, I do myself because I learn how to code and I'm still used to that. But more and more, I start actually talking to the machines. I think it's a matter of getting used to it. If it's something that is very specific to your analysis, that you really, it's easier for you to do yourself with the numbers, I will do. But some of the things that go through a long process, I think you can get a shortcut there. So I don't think it will replace, but it's just an additional opportunity, especially for those who are not coders. Because more and more you see people learning Python and really going into this. You can see the code. With AI, you can really generate this code automatically just based on large language models. And so I think it's just an additional tool. Yes?
No, it's okay. It's okay. First of all, what you said, it's not in English. You can use any language, as you said, right? And the second answer to what you have said is, it's correct. Many people, they work in the same way. They have the Excel spreadsheets and everything. But with AI, you go beyond this. You discover new ways. You discover new areas where you can go. Areas you haven't thought about. So that's the point here. If you only replace what you are doing with AI, there's no added value, as you say, but you have to go beyond, you have to discover new areas. That's what it is here. So, sorry to interrupt.
No, please, go ahead. It's fine.
You know what I think is the problem here is that many people in here, they don't know how to come there, what you are talking about. Yeah? What is the next step in my company to initiate this AI process or this step to go to AI? Many companies have this problem, and I see, sorry to say, I see many times they give to a young person who just hasn't anything to do at the moment, say, go and try, and this is not the right approach. So maybe you with the you have to show people where is the entry point to come to what you...
I mean, we talked to lots of our clients, especially on this AI strategy, data and AI strategy. This is basically my colleagues doing, so I'm more on the implementation, Umsetzung. But indeed, there must be a vision. There must be a vision. There must be something bigger than just a few individuals playing around with it. So it happens a lot that the companies normally have a dual approach. So they either centralize, where they have an AI center of competency, but this normally the center of companies allow business experts to play with the technology and then see what happens. So there's a lot of experimentation. But as I said, in the end of the day, to bring these solutions into production is still a bit of a hurdle, because of data and because of governance. These are the main. There is budget for that in the moment. At least if you talk to all these companies, there is always budget to invest in data and AI. I think it's something that is very, they talk a lot about it. I haven't seen it yet, but I know that that is the promise, and it's most of these companies, especially if you think about banks now, they're very conservative. They will never be first movers in this area. I think for that, in that sense, insurance are more open, and other sectors as well. So it's a bit of there are those that are waiting and seeing to understand what's happening, and there are those that really have now budget and they're experimenting a lot, but they're struggling to bring this to production. But the money is there. I think there is also the pressure to invest on this now.
I have a question in terms of adoption. I mean, this is exactly people and culture. Do you see a difference from the US or like the Anglo-Saxon environment to the European, like German companies?
I do see. I see, especially at EY. So EY, also many companies they work independently. If I look at the projects that my colleagues do in US, in Europe, in UK, or if UK belongs to Europe or not, but if you look at these two countries or segments, they seem to be much further ahead, and they're much less concerned with the regulation. So they really try things, and they do think about that later. If you look at Germany, if you look at Italy, Spain, Switzerland, and Switzerland, this data and AI division at EY started last year, so it didn't even have it. It was just being done by individuals in the company, and now finally it's structured in one division. But the cases that we are dealing here are basically data quality cases, just to enable any of this to happen, whereas our colleagues in other countries seem to be further ahead. But I think Switzerland has a big potential to become a center, because if I used to have my own company, and I know a few colleagues, interestingly enough, all these startups in Switzerland, many of their clients are in the UK and not in Switzerland. They're outside, unless you're talking about big companies like an UBS that invests a lot, and other Swiss Re, Zurich. The mid-market is really not, is very conservative when it comes to this.
So it's a lot about people and culture, I would say, experimenting, getting new things,
it is
acquired
mainly,
and so on, because technology is the same here and in the US.
Yeah.
Processes are the same, governance might be different, but the mindset is probably the most important.
I agree. I think the technology will become a commodity. Everybody has access to this technology. It's people and mindset. I agree with you. Good. If there's no more questions, then we can close here. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Finally, the mandatory risk warning. The content of this episode is for general information only and is not a recommendation to buy or sell any financial products. All information is supplied without guarantee, and this is not an investment advisory.